May 12, 1945. A waterlogged trench hidden in the Burmese jungle. 3 Gurkha riflemen huddled in the dark, straining to hear the rustle of at least 200 Japanese soldiers sneaking through the undergrowth toward them. Rifleman Lachhiman Gurung, 27, barely 5 feet tall, clutched his Lee Enfield and waited. His post was the most advanced point in the British defensive line, the hinge of the whole perimeter. If it fell, the enemy would turn the flank and annihilate 2 surrounded companies of Gurkhas. At 1:20 a.m., grenades began to fall. Gurung watched one arc through the gloom and land just outside the trench. He snatched it up and hurled it back. The detonation lit the jungle for an instant, exposing dozens of Japanese closing in. A second grenade landed inside the trench. Gurung picked it up and threw it out, where it exploded. A third struck his feet. He bent, grabbed it, and it blew in his hand. The blast ripped away the fingers of his right hand. Shrapnel shredded his face and destroyed his right eye. Burns scored his arm, chest, and legs. The other 2 men in the trench were injured by the same explosion. 200 Japanese were surging toward them, shouting, firing, throwing more grenades. Gurung bled, half blind, missing much of his right hand. Any sane soldier would have surrendered or died. Instead, with his left hand he seized his rifle and began to kill. For 4 hours he held that trench alone, firing, reloading, firing again, one-handed, roaring challenges at the attackers to come meet a Gurkha. At dawn, the enemy pulled back. 31 bodies lay before his position. 31 men felled by 1 rifleman with 1 good hand. A man who by every rule of warfare should have been dead in the first minute. This is the untold account of one of World War I's most astonishing single-man defenses. From a mountain village in Nepal, where a boy enlisted to escape penury, to the Burmese front where the Imperial Japanese Army learned the cost of attacking a Gurkha who refused to yield. From the grenade that wrecked his hand to the 4 hours of hell that won him the Victoria Cross. Discover how one rifleman proved that courage doesn't require 2 hands. It requires refusing to give up. Dahakani, Nepal. December 1917. Lachhiman Gurung was born in a tiny hill village west of Kathmandu. His father eked out a living from a small plot of land, barely feeding the family. Mountain life meant hard labor, meager prospects, and an unwelcome choice for young men: stay and farm, or enlist in the British Indian Army as a Gurkha. The famed Nepalese warriors who had served Britain since 1815, Gurkhas, inspired dread across the empire. Fearless, disciplined, armed with the curved kukri knife every recruit carried and could use deadlier than most blades. British officers prized them highly. Opposing troops learned to fear their regiments. The Gurkha creed was blunt: better to die than be a coward. Gurung grew up on stories of Gurkha valor, men from villages like his who had earned medals fighting for Britain in India, Afghanistan, and Europe. The army offered steady pay, status, and a way out of subsistence farming, but enlistment required passing a harsh selection and meeting a minimum height of 5 feet. Gurung measured 4 feet 11 inches under the bar. Under normal circumstances, he'd have been turned away. But 1940 was not a normal year. In December of that year, Gurung walked to a British recruiting post. World War II was spreading. Germany ruled much of Europe and Japan, prepared to sweep through Asia. Britain urgently needed soldiers. Height rules were quietly relaxed. Gurung, 23, was accepted. He joined the 4th Battalion, 8th Gurkha Rifles, one of the Indian Army's most storied units. Tales of how he actually enlisted vary. One version says his father sent him to buy cigarettes. He met a friend enlisting and the 2 went to the recruiting station. Together, he never returned with the cigarettes. 5 years later, he came home minus an eye and much of a hand. His father learned why in place of a cigarette purchase. Whether literal or embellished, the facts are firm. Gurung enlisted in December 1940, completed training, mastered the Lee Enfield, learned jungle tactics, and absorbed the Gurkha ethos: forward in attack, unyielding in defense, never surrender, fight to the last man in round. These principles were central to Gurkha identity. By 1940, Gurung's battalion was in Burma, a theater of savage fighting, dense jungle monsoon mud, disease that killed as many as combat, and a fanatical Imperial Japanese Army that had swept through Southeast Asia in 1942 and rarely showed mercy. Japanese doctrine prized fighting to the death. Capture meant humiliation or worse. Since 1944, Allied forces had been pushing the Japanese back through Burma. Operation Extended Capital aimed to retake central Burma and sever Japanese supply lines. The 8th Gurkha Rifles were part of that push, advancing through swamps, fording rivers, and climbing jungle-cloaked hills. Every move risked ambush, snipers, and desperate defenders willing to fight fiercely. By May 1945, the Japanese position was crumbling. Allies crossed the Irrawaddy and were advancing on Rangoon. Scattered Japanese forces tried to break out of encirclement, desperate and dangerous, ready to attack anything in their path to escape. On May 9th, the 4th Battalion, 8th Gurkha Rifles, was ordered to block retreat routes near Tungdaw. The ground was thick jungle pierced only by muddy trails. Monsoon rains had begun. Everything was soaked and treacherous. The Gurkhas dug defensive positions and waited. Intelligence indicated Japanese movement in the area. How many and when remained unknown. C Company was sighted on a reverse slope with trenches dug into the hillside and overlapping fields of fire, but the jungle limited sight to mere dozens of yards. The Japanese could close before being seen, expert at silent infiltration and night assaults that overran positions before defenders reacted. The Gurkhas had faced such tactics before: speed, violence, grenades, and vicious close-quarters combat. Gurung's section was given the most forward post, 3 men in a trench roughly 100 yards ahead of the main line. Their task was simple but near suicidal: give early warning, delay any enemy assault. By the company time, it was the most perilous position on the perimeter, first to be struck, hardest to reinforce, most likely to be swamped. Gurung and 2 comrades prepared the forward trench as best they could, dug deeper, stacked sandbags, cleared firing lanes, and laid out ammunition within reach. Gurung placed his kukri on the trench parapet, ready at hand if the Japanese closed in. Steel would be needed. That curved blade had slain FOs for generations of Gurkhas. He expected to use it. On the night of May 12th, the Japanese attacked in force. Not a probing patrol but a major assault. At least 200 troops striking C Company with grenades, machine gun and rifle fire, and screaming charges meant to panic defenders and crack the line. The entire blow was aimed at one section, Gurung's. At 1:20 a.m., Naik Debe Singh Bura, his section commander, had only just got men to stand to when grenades began falling. Japanese infiltrators hurled explosives to soften the defenses. Bura, a few yards behind Gurung, saw the first grenade land near the forward trench and watched Gurung scoop it up and throw it back. The blast momentarily illuminated dozens of enemy troops surging forward. A second grenade landed inside the trench. Gurung tossed it out, and it detonated in midair. Japanese attackers closed, firing and screaming. A third grenade arced in and landed at Gurung's feet. He bent to pick it up, and it blew before he could throw it. The explosion tore away the fingers of his right hand, mangled his palm, shredded his face, and blew out his right eye. Burns and shrapnel marked his right arm, chest, face, and legs. He was thrown back, bleeding from many wounds. The other 2 men in the trench were also badly hurt. Seconds later, 200 Japanese were upon them. With his comrades wounded and the enemy almost on top of them, any sensible soldier would have retreated to the main line. But Lachhiman Gurung did not flinch. He grasped his Lee Enfield with his left hand. The bolt-action rifle was designed to be cycled and fired right-handed. His right hand was destroyed. He improvised, bracing the rifle against his left hip. He worked the bolt with his left hand, aimed with his lone good eye, and opened fire into the shadows closing in. The attackers expected dying defenders. Instead, they met an enraged Gurkha, firing accurately, shouting in Nepali, daring them to come and fight. The shock stalled their advance for precious seconds, letting him cut down several men and sow confusion among their ranks. The enemy adapted, more grenades rained in, and without a functional right hand Gurung could no longer throw them back. He pressed himself to the trench wall and let explosions spray him. While continuing to fire, the Japanese attempted to rush the position. Gurung shot them as they came. Corpses stacked up before the trench, turning the ground into obstacles that hampered the living. From behind, Nik debasing Bura watched in disbelief. He had seen Gurkhas fight with extraordinary courage, but this, a grievously wounded man fighting as though whole, exceeded any precedent. Bura tried to send reinforcements forward, but intense Japanese fire cut down anyone who tried to cross the open ground. Gurung was alone, one man, one eye, one working hand, facing 200 determined attackers. The physical demands were staggering. The Lee Enfield weighed about 9 pounds. Cycling a bolt-action rifle with one hand while aiming and firing required strength, coordination, and practice Gurung had never been trained for. He learned it under fire, bleeding, half-blind. While the enemy sought to kill him, pain, shock, and blood loss would have felled most men. But Gurung stayed conscious on sheer will. He had a duty: hold the trench, stop the Japanese, protect his brothers. Everything else, including his own life, was secondary. The Japanese, baffled and fearful of the unseen shooter, tried to find and flank him. Gurung shifted his aim to cover approaches. The jungle funneled attackers into narrow killing zones where his fire was most deadly. The battlefield was black except for brief flashes from explosions and muzzle flashes. Gurung fired at light and sound, bringing down FOs he could barely see. His section commander later described him as fighting like a demon. Every few seconds another Japanese soldier fell. Their attempts to pinpoint his position failed because his muzzle flashes moved as he changed stance in the trench. They fired blindly. Gurung's shots found their marks. He was a trained marksman. Even injured and one-handed, he was sharper than many whole soldiers. Time collapsed into a roar of continuous gunfire, detonations, and screams. Gurung fired until his rifle was empty, then reloaded with his left hand, a process that normally takes seconds, now prolonged. Every reload was a vulnerable moment. He fumbled cartridges in darkness, loaded by touch, returned his rifle to action, and fired. More grenades struck him. More shrapnel bit into his body. More pain piled atop pain. Blood loss weakened him. Vision dimmed from shock and injury. He felt himself slipping, but the thought of the Japanese breaking through and slaughtering his comrades would not let him stop. He fired on. Ammunition became critical. Gurung had begun the night with the standard load, 50 rounds in pouches and some in the rifle. He fired steadily. Each round needed to count. He could not waste ammunition, yet could not allow the enemy to close. Balancing those needs in the dark, with no tally of remaining rounds, he simply kept firing until empty, reloaded, and fired again. Around 3 in the morning, the Japanese intensified their effort. This was not random. It was a coordinated surge. Officers rallied their men for a concentrated push aimed at breaking that one stubborn point. They came from multiple directions with grenades, machine guns, and charges, willing to accept heavy losses to force through. Gurung answered with the same relentlessness. He was no longer calculating. Training and reflex ran his body. Aim, fire. Cycle the bolt with his left hand. Aim, fire. Targets fell. Wave after wave broke on that trench like surf on rock. By 4 in the morning, the attackers' momentum faltered. Officers could not muster another decisive push. They had sustained too many casualties and faced too many dead in front of that trench, and fear of the unseen shooter, a demon in their midst, spread. They regrouped, uncertain. They still outnumbered the defenders, but they could not mass force into the killing zone without suffering the same fate. Gurung felt the reprieve. He was barely conscious. Blood loss and shock were sapping him. His right hand was gone. His right eye useless. Shrapnel and burns ached everywhere. Every motion brought fresh agony. He checked his pouches by feel low. Maybe enough for another round of fighting. Maybe not. Medical care was not on his mind. Evacuation did not occur to him. He simply waited, rifle ready, listening for the next attack. Behind him, C Company held. The rest of the line heard the firefight at the forward post and tried to aid with supporting fire, but darkness and jungle limited their assistance. Naik Bureau reported the situation up the chain. A single, badly wounded rifleman alone in the forward trench, still firing, still staving off an entire enemy assault. The company commander at first doubted such a report, then recognized the pattern of fire. Single, controlled shots, precise, coming from the forward post. Reinforcements could not reach Gurung. Japanese control of the ground between the forward trench and main line made relief impossible, so Gurung remained alone, grievously hurt, running low on ammunition, yet unbowed. The enemy had committed its entire force to that one point. It had failed. One man had stopped them, a man who by any rational measure should have died in minutes. As dawn neared, the Japanese launched one last, desperate charge, a final attempt before daylight exposed them to Allied aircraft and artillery. Gathering what remained of their strength, they hurled themselves at Gurung's position, screaming and firing, accepting high casualties for the chance to break through. Lachhiman Gurung met them with his last available rounds. When the rifle was empty, he reached for his kukri. If the attackers reached the trench, he would finish the fight with steel one-handed, half-blind, bleeding out. Better to die than to be branded a coward. Yet the final charge broke before it reached him. Attackers fell. Survivors retreated into the jungle as daylight crept in. The concealment of darkness was gone. Staying meant being butchered in the open by planes and artillery. The Japanese melted back, abandoning their dead. At dawn on May 13th, Naik Debasing Bureau and fellow Gurkhas ran forward to check the trench. They expected to find Gurung dead. Surviving 4 hours under such assault, while so grievously wounded, seemed impossible. But Gurung was alive, barely sitting amid empty casings, his rifle in his lap and his kukri on the parapet. His right hand was destroyed, his right eye gone. Blood smeared everything. He was conscious, still scanning the jungle, ready to fight again. Bureau and the others pulled him from the trench, gave him water, applied field dressings. The wounds were catastrophic. The right hand would not recover. The right eye was lost. Shrapnel lodged in his body. Burns demanded care. He had lost much blood. Field surgeons worked to save his life, but could not save the hand or eye. Amputation left a stump. The right eye was permanently blind. He survived, but was forever changed. When other Gurkhas surveyed the ground around the trench, they were astonished. 31 dead Japanese lay within a few yards of his position. 31 confirmed kills by one man with one arm over 4 hours. Blood trails, dropped equipment, and other signs suggested many more casualties that had been dragged away. The physical evidence spoke louder than any report. Gurung had single-handedly repulsed an assault of at least 200 soldiers. Recommendation for the Victoria Cross followed immediately. Naik Debasing Bureau filed a detailed witness statement. Company command endorsed it. Battalion command forwarded it up the chain. This was the kind of action that defined supreme valor. One man holding an impossible post against overwhelming force, fighting with catastrophic wounds, refusing to withdraw or surrender, and saving his entire company through unwavering will and skill. The London Gazette published the citation on August 9, 1945. Days before the war ended. It read, in part, Rifleman Lachhiman Gurung was manning the most forward post of his platoon, which bore the brunt of an attack by at least 200 of the Japanese enemy. Twice, he hurled back grenades which had fallen on his trench, but the third exploded in his right hand, blowing off his fingers, shattering his arm and severely wounding him in the face, body, and right leg. His 2 comrades were also badly wounded, but the rifleman, now alone and disregarding his wounds, loaded and fired his rifle with his left hand for 4 hours, calmly waiting for each attack which he met with fire at point-blank range. Afterwards, when the wounded were counted, it is reported that there were 31 dead Japanese around his position, which he had killed with only one arm. The citation captured the essentials, but could not fully convey the horror Gurung endured. 4 hours of unceasing combat, bleeding and half-blinded, agonized yet operating a rifle, one-handed in pitch-black jungle, against an enemy that outnumbered him by perhaps 50 to 1. No reinforcement could reach him. Retreat was impossible. His actions embodied the Gurkha code: better to die than be a coward. Gurung recovered in military hospitals. The war ended while he remained under treatment. Japan surrendered in August 1945, and the Burma campaign was over. He would never again return to combat. He went home to Nepal, changed by wounds but carrying the Victoria Cross, the highest award for gallantry in the British Commonwealth. Only 13 Gurkhas have ever received the VC, and Gurung was among them. Post-war life was hard. Farming with one hand proved difficult. The British government provided a modest pension for VC recipients, but it was insufficient. Gurung faced financial struggles, married, raised children, and tried to live a normal life. Yet in Nepal, he was revered. The one-handed Gurkha who had killed 31 Japanese. He earned immense respect. Children learned his story in school. He became a living emblem of Gurkha valor. In 1995, 50 years after the action at Tungdaw, Gurung was invited to London for Victoria Cross commemorations. He met fellow recipients, was honored by Queen Elizabeth II, and attended events at the Imperial War Museum. People wanted his account to know how he had done what he did. His answers were simple. I was a Gurkha. I had my duty. I did what needed doing. He spent the rest of his life in Nepal. Over time, the British government improved pensions for Gurkha veterans, and Gurung received better support in his later years. He became an advocate for veterans' welfare, urging care for aging soldiers who had served Britain for generations and deserved proper assistance. His voice carried weight. He was a living legend, a Victoria Cross holder whose deeds left no question about his courage. Lachhiman Gurung died on December 12, 2010, aged 92. His passing was mourned across Nepal and the United Kingdom. News outlets reported his death. Military units paid tribute. He was cremated according to Hindu rites. His Victoria Cross was preserved for posterity. Obituaries and remembrances retold his night in May 1945. How one rifleman did what seemed impossible. How duty and courage overcame injury and overwhelming odds. How a Gurkha embodied better to die than be a coward. His legacy endures. The 8th Gurkha Rifles, now incorporated into the Indian Army's lineage, teach recruits about Lachhiman Gurung just as he had learned about heroes of previous generations. The Gurkha Museum in Winchester, England, displays material about his action, his VC citation, photographs, and context to help visitors grasp what he accomplished. Most importantly, his story continues to inspire, a testament that courage, resolve, and a refusal to yield can shape history and save comrades. That night in the Burmese jungle is more than a tale of battlefield heroics. It is a portrait of duty lived to its extreme. A village boy who joined the army to escape poverty became a soldier who, when the moment demanded, refused surrender and held a line that meant survival for many. He showed the world that bravery is not a measure of limbs or sight, but of will. The kukri he left on the parapet and the empty cartridges around him were silent witnesses to an hour-by-hour struggle, where every choice was between death and duty. Lachhiman Gurung's single-handed defense at Tungdaw remains an extraordinary chapter in the long Gurkha story, a reminder that sometimes one person's refusal to give up can alter the fate of many.